RM Sotheby's is the world's largest collector car auction house by total sales. They are the preeminent market maker of high-quality collector cars and collections, regardless of size or complexity. By working in partnership with the Sotheby's team and its network of 80 offices in 40 countries, RM Sotheby's has established the largest client network of any collector car auction house in the world. Join the RM Sotheby's family by connecting with one of their car specialists at rmsotheby's.com or contact me directly at gstanley@rmsotheby's.com. All right, welcome to the Collector Car Podcast. This is a bonus episode because there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in the RM Sotheby's world as it relates to really significant cars from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum that have come up for offer. You hear once in a lifetime a lot, but this car has been in the museum since, I believe, shortly after it finished racing in the late 1960s. So quite an opportunity for what an incredible special car. And yes, I do judge Ferraris, but I am not a 250 LM expert and I am not an automotive historian, but I have one here with me. So I'd like to welcome Ken Gross. Ken, how are you doing today?
Good morning, Greg. Just great. Thanks.
Well, I appreciate it. You're becoming quite the guest on the Collector Car Podcast, and that's only because you are such an automotive expert and such a nice guy. So I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
So this car is quite special. 1964 Ferrari 250 LM. It ran at Le Mans. It was the overall winner, 1965 24-hour Le Mans. I know I can read the bullet points off of any sort of catalog ad, but I know you know this car better than I do. And I just thought maybe could you share with why is this car so special? What are your thoughts on this car? Do you have any history with the car? Just kind of the overall story of this car from a historian's perspective.
Well, this is a 250 LM. Ferrari serial number for it was 5893. The 250 LM was basically the successor to the 250 GTO. It's a mid-engine car. It has essentially the same 3.3 liter engine. It's technically a 275, so they made 32 of these. The first one was a 3-liter car, and all the subsequent ones are 3.3 liters. And this car was owned by the North American racing team, Luigi Chinetti. And by the way, let me back up and say that Ferrari wanted the FIA to homologate these cars, but he never made the 100 cars that were required to do so. So it had to race as a prototype and initially. At Le Mans in 1965, Luigi Chinetti entered his team. His drivers were Jochen Rindt, who was probably the first posthumous Grand Prix champion. He died in the season that he won. And Maston Gregory, a young guy who was better known as the Kansas City Flash, bespectacled, as you say, but a wonderful driver and a real diminutive guy who was famous for saying that he'd rather jump out of a car than have it roll over and burn up and so forth. But these were two very, very good drivers. And the NART team felt they had a pretty good chance, but they had other cars that were faster. This car was really not supposed to win the race. What they wanted to do was have it be the hare and hounds kind of thing, where it would get out in front and set a very fast pace. Might not last the whole race, but it might cause some of the competition, like Ford GT40s, to burn up. But it kept running and running, and it had some problems. And they had one very long pit stop. But Luigi Chinetti Sr., who I interviewed many years ago, said that they didn't really expect that it was going to win, and he recalls going to the tire pile. There were a certain number of tires, and going back and looking at some of the tires they had discarded to see if they could put them back on the car, because it kept running. The other Ferraris dropped out one by one, and when the race, and during the race, and there's a lot of interesting stuff that happened with this car. Maston Gregory and Jochen Rindt were the drivers, but an American driver named Ed Hugas, at one point they couldn't find Rindt, so they put Hugas in the car. They weren't supposed to do that because he wasn't officially registered to drive it. So some accounts that you read mention that Ed was one of the drivers, but had it been formally known, the FIA would probably have disqualified the car. But I believe there were three drivers, and at the end of the race, this car averaged 120.9 something miles an hour for the 24 hours, which is pretty extraordinary, and it won. And a Ferrari would not win Le Mans again for 58 years.
Wow.
So part of the significance of this car, I mean, 32 of them made. That's fewer than GTOs. Phenomenal racing history, Le Mans winner. And then it became the property of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, Tony Hulman, who had some wonderful cars for many, many years. And now it's up for sale, and people are speculating, it's rarer than a GTO. What could it possibly go for? So I don't know what RM's estimates are. Maybe you know, Greg.
Yeah, the estimate's north of 25 million euros, which I think I did the math, and that was like $32 million. So it's really fascinating, because how do you put a price on history? This is kind of the car that made Ferrari. Is that correct? I mean, it was more successful than the GTOs.
Well, I mean, statistically, the GTO won a lot. GTOs won a lot of races, and so did these. And I honestly don't know the exact number comparison, but this was a technically more updated car. Some people think they're even prettier. I don't share that opinion. I'm still a GTO fan, but it was technically much more advanced because of its engine location, a little bit faster, a little better aerodynamics. And let's face it, if you want one of the 39 GTOs, really 36, and three of the second series, there's only 32 of these. I mean, there's just not a lot of these cars. So, and they seldom come up on the market. So if I were guessing, I think somewhere in the 25 to 35 million dollar range is probably right. I don't think we believe there's been a GTO sale in the mid 60 million range. And I don't know subsequently if there's been one more, but somehow the mystique of the 250 GTO outweighs the 250 LMs. But having said that, it only takes one auction and one precedent. So if there's two collectors who really want this car and they drive the price up, it could be that a 250 LM is the new high point of Ferrari. We'll see that when the car is sold.
So I'll make my educated guess here. And anyway, so I think, the last LM, I think that sold publicly was around 17 million. So you figure in with the exchange rate, this is probably double that. So I think that's a fairly conservative good ballpark for RM to put out there. I'm going to say it's going to go a little higher. I'm going to say it's going to hit 40 million. I think the GTO, there's a GTO club. A lot of people don't know this. Like, if you have a GTO, you're invited to this tour. You're not invited to this tour if you have an LM. And so I think that really, honestly, is one of the reasons the GTOs are, you get into this exclusive club. And I think the GTOs may be a little bit more user friendly when you're trying to drive it down the road. These LMs usability might be a little bit harder. And I agree with you. I think the GTOs are prettier, but this is a rear engine, crazy, 12-cylinder beast. Really, really beautiful car. I love what you said, though, that this car was not meant to win. It basically was out there to wear the other ones out. Let's put a fast lap. Let's be, like you said, the rabbit out there. You know what? Yeah. Let's run the race as fast as we can. The car blows up. But you know what? We had the other cars. We forced the other cars, the Ford GT40s, to run fast, and maybe they'll blow up before the rest of our cars, And it's amazing, like you said, that they ran out of tires or whatever, and they need to see, hey, we need to keep this thing going. And it continued to go. Now, one thing I heard, and let me know if you know this or not, but the reason it was donated to the museum was that at the time, Ferrari didn't want the car because it wasn't a factory race car. It was a privateer. Have you heard anything about that? Why it was gifted?
Well, it was a privateer because Canetti represented Ferrari in North America, but I honestly don't know the origin of how it got there. I will say that Tony Hellman managed to get some pretty amazing cars like the W196 Mercedes that they're going to be selling. And he was a very respected figure in the auto world. He had all of Rudy Carciola's trophies, an amazing display, and they still have those at the Indy Museum. But your listeners are probably aware that you'd think to yourself, well, why would they sell this? Why would they sell that Mercedes? But their mission is really the Indianapolis 500. And like many museums, they don't have the funds to necessarily maintain, show, display, travel some of their cars. So the sales of these cars will be very helpful for the Indy 500 Museum. It's undergoing a complete restoration. The building is going to be all changed, new exhibits. I've seen some preliminary sketches. It's really going to be a fabulous museum, and the sale of these cars will help finance that and help maintain these cars into the future.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, as always, Ken, thanks for being on the Collector Car Podcast. I know that you have a big Bugatti exhibit happening right now in Easton, Maryland. I will have a podcast coming out here shortly that reviews the details of this Bugatti exhibit that you have put together. So as always, I appreciate you being on the Collector Car Podcast and sharing your passion and expertise for incredible cars.
Thanks, Greg. Pleasure to be with you.
All right, welcome to the second half of this 250 LM special on the Collector Car Podcast. So I had Ken Gross on to talk about, some of the nuts and bolts, literally about how special that car is. Now I want to have Josh Stiegman on. Josh has a long history with this car, and he pretty much insisted on being on the show. So Josh, how you doing today?
Doing great, Greg. How are you?
Good. Now, you've been on the show 3 times. This is, I think, your 4th. Is that correct?
I think you are correct.
Yeah, and I know you've been photographing this car for maybe a decade or 2. I don't know. You tell me, because you're based in Indy. So if you would, give us a little overview of what you do in the car world and why this car is so special to you.
Yeah, so I work at Motor Vault. We are a collector car and sports car dealership. We focus on everything from Porsches to Corvettes. Obviously, we've got an Alpina C1 here, Aston V8, so a whole variety of stuff. We're true car guys. It's just me, my boss is business partner, so small team. But my first job ever, I was a tour guide at the IMS Museum, and I have some history with all of these cars, including the 250. Because basically the 250 LM is the reason why I even got my first job there. I was going in for senior photos at a Ferrari jacket, knew a couple of the people that worked there, and they said, hey, let's get your photo in front of the 250. And this was, senior high school me. I was all over.
Wow, that's something else.
Yes, and that led to them realizing my passion. And then over that summer, they brought me in for an interview to be a tour guide on and off for 2 years, which was awesome. And about 6 years later, 2021, my boss, Brian, worked something together with the IMS Museum while we were hosting Indy Cars and Coffee. And they brought the car out of the basement. And I got to spend some time with it. I got to start the car. I got to ride shotgun in the car. Very, very cool experience. And we did a little private photo shoot with it. And then a couple of years ago, did that again as well. So I sent you some really high-end photos my friend Sean Grove took that car. We did some light painting, but that car for me is my all-time #1 Ferrari, period.
Wow. Okay. So that's really special to you, right? And I know we were
Yes.
trying to get you to see the car before it went overseas, but we were unable to do so. So tell us a little bit about this car. Like when you first saw it, knowing the history of it, what was the most impactful thing? Was it the way it looked, because it's such a cool rear engine V12? Was it the racing history? Was it the patina on the car?
It's a little bit of a combo of everything, because there's a lot of cars that you could be around that obviously you guys represent or we represent, and they're special cars. There's something different about it. But when you're around that car, putting the whole combination of that together, you're in rare air. I mean, this is a monumental, massive car, and obviously up until 2023, it was the last Ferrari to win Le Mans outright. And the fact that this car is still in raced patina, it's got chips on it, it's got scratches on it, it's got a tear in the seat from Jakenrent. I mean, that car is absolutely pure. And being able to see it in different light than just the museum seeing it outside, seeing it running, seeing it cross the yard of bricks. I mean, that just takes it to a whole different level with that car where it's just, I am violently connected to it.
That's awesome, man. Now, can you like give your best? I also want to ask you about the Mercedes Streamliner here a second,
Yes.
but can you also kind of give a best guess? What do you think the car is going to sell for? It's somewhat hotly debated because obviously with the Mercedes as well, it's not an easy thing.
No, I think personally the estimate that was on there, I know it's what, 27 and a half plus, I think is the estimate on the Ferrari. It's somewhere around there. I am gonna shoot for somewhere around the 40 to 50 mark. I'm just gonna say loosely, I'm gonna say 43 is what I think that car will be.
Wow, calling it at 43. I feel like I called it earlier with Ken, but I can't remember off the top of my head. So I'm going to say I'm going to go 38. The estimate is around 28 million US dollars, 25 million euro dollars. All right. So you're saying, what did you say?
I'm gonna go 43. And again, if this was the 250 LM, I personally like it more than the 250 GTO. I think there's something so special about it because it is a prototype car, but it's still a street car. So it's kind of that last of that era where it's still something you can drive and it relates to actual production street cars. Not like the 917 where that obviously changed the ball game. But I think the car would be over 50 without a question if it was the factory entry. And I think some people, especially in Europe, aren't going to connect with it as much since it's a North American racing team car. But I think the US buyers who are serious Ferrari collectors are going to go crazy for it. So that's why I'm seeing it higher than the 2830, but not over 50.
Interesting. I had this conversation with Ken just a little earlier, but it is interesting because you think about the GTOs, 36 traditional GTOs, 3 prototype cars, including the 330 LM that sold for $52 million. Pretty interesting because there's a GTO club that people want to be a part of. There is not a 250 LM club that I'm aware of, and I think it's a little bit hairier on the street than a GTO is. Yes. So it is curious. It will be very curious to see what happens. Now, tell me, were you in love with the LM more than the Streamliner, or did the Streamliner capture your attention as well?
It does. It's just, it's two completely different cars. So obviously you've got the LM, which is a car that can be street driven. And it's a car I have a personal connection with. When you look at the Streamliner though, I mean, it's art on wheels, and it so happened that the greatest of all time, one of the greatest of all time, Fangio drove it. And, being from Indy, I relate more to the open wheel Indy cars. So being the fact that it is a Grand Prix car that shouldn't be open wheel, it's kind of really cool that it breaks the kind of bends the rules, because there really weren't any other cars like it. So it captured me, but for me personally, obviously I have the story with the LM, but I've always loved that Streamliner. I mean, it's kind of one of those where if you walk into a big art museum and, there's a Monet, I mean, it's kind of what you get. It's just like, oh my God.
Right. Awesome. Well, awesome. So do you want to put a number on the Streamliner as well?
Yeah, I think you and I talked about that before. I'm going to go 72.
72. Okay. I think I went 78. I can't quite remember offhand. Too many numbers thrown around here. So
you and I are normally pretty close. We're normally within about 10% of each other.
Right. Well, cool, man. Anything else you wanted to mention about the LM? I think it might be fun to have you on when we cover the rest of the cars for the Moto Miami sale. Anything else about the LM?
Yeah. I just really hope personally the car stays stateside. I want to see that car again. I hope to see it, exercised and shown like the IMS Museum did. And I will want to do a shout out to my friends at the museum, and it's going to be very exciting. The start of April, they unveil and open up the new museum, which looks exactly the same from the outside, but the inside is completely different. I believe it's about a 90 million renovation, and
wow.
Yeah, and the whole point of why they're selling these cars is they're pretty much keeping it straight to Indy 500, IndyCar, Indiana built cars, and anything related to the Motor Speedway. So with them shifting their goals and their ideas, I mean, I personally, it's sad to see that car go, but I understand it, and they got their enjoyment out of it. And hopefully the museum gets some more winners in, and maybe some Jeff Gordon cars, since they don't have any Gordon or Stewart cars, and be cool to see that go up.
You actually just kind of answered my next question is, are there cars that you've wondered for years, why are these cars not in the museum? You just mentioned Gordon, Stewart. What other things? Any older Indy cars? You're like, I mean, I know there's a couple of the Indy race winners in the teens that are in other museums. Any particular one or two that you're like, man, we really need to go after that car?
I mean, I know, obviously one of, I know the 75 Eagle, the Bobby Unser car. That car is privately owned down in Florida, I believe. And I think Gordy Johncock's car is privately owned as well, the 73 winner. I mean, cars like that would be great, but I think just cars that are important to like the history of the change of the Speedway. I know that they'll never sell it, but Cummins has the 52 diesel that was four-wheel drive and turbo diesel. So it knocked off a lot of check marks for, first of. So cars like that would be great to add. Just something to kind of tie in all bits of history, and actually some modern Indy cars, because they really don't have any. So the last two generations of a couple of those cars would be good as well.
Well, you said, Cummins diesel will never sell it, but a lot of people thought Indy would never sell these cars.
Correct.
So you never know.
Everything's for sale at the right price.
Yeah. All right, buddy. Well, what's the way our listeners can learn more about you and Motor Vault?
Yeah, so we've got website motorvault.com. You can find all of our current offerings. We focus on consignments. That's not strictly what we do, but we have a very, very solid consignment program, and that's why we're able to get a lot of these really cool cars. So check us out there. Check us out on Instagram and on YouTube. We're doing some cool content on there as well. So hopefully see you guys. Give us a like, follow, and a subscribe.
Awesome, buddy. Well, thanks for joining the Collector Car Podcast as always.
All righty. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate you having me on.